My wife's lawyer served me papers at work, but I was holding her signed confession already. She wanted my children, my fortune, and even my legacy, all with the help of the man I once called my best friend. But the game they were playing had rules they didn't understand because I wrote them. And before this ended, they would learn exactly what that meant. Have you ever faced a betrayal so deep it forced you to fight for everything that mattered? Share your thoughts below. Your story might remind someone that integrity can still win. My name is Marcus Sterling. I'm 46 years old, and this is the story of how I turned the greatest betrayal of my life into a fight for truth, justice, and my children. Marcus Sterling sat in the dim light of his basement office, the quiet hum of servers filling the silence around him. On one of the monitors, high-definition video played in a loop surveillance footage he had extracted from Rachel's supposedly encrypted laptop. She sat draped across a velvet armchair in a hotel suite that screamed wealth, laughing as David Chen poured champagne into her glass. The soundless footage told him everything he needed to know. The way she tilted her head back, the way her hand lingered on David's arm, the way David leaned in, whispering something that made her smile like a woman who believed she'd already won. On her wrist was a diamond bracelet. Marcus hadn't bought one that glinted under the soft hotel lighting as she lifted her glass. David's lips moved, and even without audio, Marcus could read the words, "A new life." He stared at the screen for a long moment, expression unreadable. 8 years of marriage reduced to pixels. Rachel had always been ambitious, but this was more than ambition. This was calculation. Marcus switched screens, pulling up a folder he had decrypted the night before. Each file a nail in the coffin of the life he thought they had built together. Encrypted text messages between Rachel and David scrolled across the monitor, their words cold, deliberate. David wrote, "The prenup won't matter if we can prove he's been using company resources for surveillance. Your mother's connections will guarantee you full custody." Rachel's reply was worse than anything Marcus had prepared himself to see. "Ethan and Sophia barely know him anyway. He chose work over family years ago. We'll make sure they understand that." Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had been betrayed before in his line of work, colleagues selling confidential data, clients withholding truths. But this was different. This was personal. They weren't just cheating on him. They were rewriting his life, turning him into a villain in his children's eyes, erasing the years he had sacrificed to keep his family safe and cared for. He replayed Rachel's messages in his mind, each word cutting deeper than the footage of her with David. She wasn't just leaving him. She was orchestrating his destruction with the same precision she once used to close million-dollar real estate deals. His eyes drifted around the basement office, and for the first time he really looked at his own home. Upstairs, the colonial was filled with designer furniture. Rachel had chosen art pieces, she had hung rugs she had insisted on importing from Turkey. None of it reflected him, not the man who had grown up in South Boston, who had built his business from nothing, who valued function over flash. Even the family photos in the hallway had been arranged by her, carefully curated moments that looked perfect, but felt hollow now. He wondered how much of their marriage had been genuine. How much had been performance for the world, for David, for her powerful family? Marcus turned back to the screen, his jaw tightening, not with rage, but with resolve. Rage was for amateurs, for people who reacted without thinking. He had built his entire career on never reacting, only acting with precision. If Rachel and David wanted to turn this into a game of strategy, they had chosen the wrong opponent. He switched off the monitor, the room falling into deeper silence. His hands moved methodically, pulling a thick folder from the locked drawer of his desk. Inside were bank statements, property records, and investigative files he had been compiling for months, long before he even confirmed the affair. He had suspected something was wrong, and as always, his instincts had been right. Rachel trusted him with everything financial. She had never paid attention to the details, never questioned the documents he put in front of her. That trust, the one part of their marriage she had never doubted, was about to become her most expensive mistake. Marcus placed the folder on the desk, opening it to the first page. His reflection stared back at him from the glossy photograph clipped to the top, a picture of Rachel and David together at a charity gala months ago, smiling for the cameras while plotting his downfall behind the scenes. For a brief moment he allowed himself to feel the weight of it all. The loss of the woman he thought he knew, the betrayal from a man he once called his best friend, the threat to his children's future. Then just as quickly he buried it. This wasn't the time for emotions. This was preparation, and preparation was what he did best. He closed the folder, his expression hardening into the same quiet determination that had made him one of the most respected cybersecurity consultants in Boston. Rachel and David had made their move. Now it was his turn. Back in 2013, before life became a maze of distrust and whispered accusations, Marcus Sterling was a man still trying to adjust to civilian life. After 12 years in naval intelligence, he had traded covert operations for the quieter but equally intense world of corporate cybersecurity consulting. That's when he met Rachel Whitmore, a dazzling real estate developer who seemed to light up every room she entered. Their connection was fast, almost reckless. Marcus wasn't the type to believe in love at first sight, but Rachel's confidence, her ambition, and the way she carried herself pulled him in. Within a year they were married. Friends called it impulsive. His Navy buddies warned him that people who rise too quickly in high society circles are often driven by something other than love. But Marcus didn't care. He believed he'd found someone who saw the man behind the uniform. 3 years later, the twins arrived, Ethan and Sophia, bright-eyed reminders of why Marcus fought so hard to build a stable life. For a while it seemed perfect, Rachel climbing the social ladder, Marcus securing contracts with high-profile clients, and both of them building the life they had dreamed about. What Rachel never fully understood was the cost of Marcus's dedication. Corporate cybersecurity consulting wasn't just risk assessments and polished presentations. It was late-night calls, emergency response for data breaches, and long hours tracking threats for companies too arrogant to believe they were vulnerable. Marcus juggled it all, rarely complaining. His nights often ended in his home office reviewing security protocols while Rachel attended charity galas or business networking dinners. He told himself it was fine. She was building her brand, and he was protecting theirs. Every time he tucked Ethan and Sophia into bed after returning from a trip, he promised himself he'd be there more often. But Rachel thrived on the lifestyle his work provided. She loved the dinners at private clubs, the invitations to exclusive events, and the quiet acknowledgement among her peers that she was married to someone who mattered. The first cracks weren't loud arguments or obvious betrayals. They were subtle late-night phone calls Rachel didn't explain, hushed conversations when Marcus entered the room, and an increasing number of business trips she took alone. At first, Marcus ignored it. He was trained to observe patterns, but he wanted to believe the woman he loved was still the same one who held his hand in the hospital when Ethan was born prematurely. But by 2019, things had shifted. Rachel's charm had become calculated. She spent more time with people Marcus didn't know, powerful investors and developers who seemed more interested in her than the projects she pitched. She grew colder toward Marcus, often criticizing the long hours he worked, as if forgetting that those same hours funded her carefully curated lifestyle. Marcus, ever the soldier, tried to fight for their marriage with quiet consistency. More family dinners, more time coaching Ethan's soccer team, and reading bedtime stories to Sophia, even when he was exhausted. But every gesture felt like throwing pebbles into a storm. By late 2020, even his friends noticed. One night, while grabbing a beer with an old Navy buddy, Marcus finally admitted, "I can track a threat from 2 miles out, but I can't figure out what's happening in my own home." What he didn't know then was that Rachel's ambition was about to cross a line he never imagined she'd step over. The real turning point began on a quiet Sunday morning when Marcus sat alone in his home office sifting through public records. Years of military intelligence work had taught him one thing: patterns never lie. Rachel's sudden aggression in their marriage, her family's growing interference, and the smug confidence she carried these days were not random. There was a deeper play, and Marcus was finally ready to uncover it. The smoking gun came buried in sealed family court documents obtained through a private source who still owed Marcus a favor. As Marcus scrolled through the scanned files, his jaw tightened. The case was from 13 years ago, an incident involving Rachel's mother, Judge Elizabeth Whitmore. The official record stated that Elizabeth had dismissed a DUI charge against a young political donor's son, citing insufficient evidence. But the sealed files told the real story. The driver had been Elizabeth's own nephew. His reckless driving had killed a family of 4 immigrants, but Elizabeth's influence had buried the truth under legal jargon and sealed testimonies. Marcus sat back staring at the screen. This wasn't just an ethical lapse, it was career-ending corruption. Rachel had always idolized her mother's power in the legal world. But now that power was a loaded gun, one Marcus could aim in the right direction if he chose. He didn't stop there. For 2 weeks, he quietly built a case piecing together financial records, campaign contributions, and photographs. Richard Whitmore, Rachel's father, was no innocent bystander. A paper trail connected him to strategic donations funneled to the district attorney's re-election campaign just days after the case was sealed. The Whitmores had built their entire public image on integrity and family values, but Marcus now held the proof of the rot beneath it. As he compiled the evidence, he remained methodical, not emotional. Every document was cross-referenced. Every photo was time-stamped. Every financial transfer was verified by independent records. Marcus knew how fragile leverage could be if it wasn't airtight, and this had to be bulletproof. By the time he was done, the file was thick with undeniable proof. One call to the right journalist or federal investigator would destroy the Whitmores' reputation forever. But Marcus wasn't reckless. He didn't want to humiliate Rachel publicly. Not yet. His goal was control, not chaos. So he waited, letting Rachel and her lawyer make the first move. That moment arrived sooner than expected. A week later, Marcus sat at his desk at Sterling Security Solutions when his assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Sterling, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says it's urgent." Marcus knew before the man even entered. Jonathan Hartley, a high-priced family attorney known for his aggressive tactics, strode in with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case. Behind him stood a process server looking uncomfortable in the corporate environment. "Marcus Sterling Hartley?" asked, though he clearly knew the answer. "That's right." The process server stepped forward, handing Marcus a thick envelope. "You've been served." Marcus took the papers calmly, not even glancing at them. Hartley's smug smile widened as he pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. "I'll save you the reading," Hartley said, leaning back. "Rachel will retain full custody of the twins. She'll also keep the house, the vehicles, and a majority of your consulting business profits. It's in everyone's best interest to make this clean. Otherwise, we'll litigate aggressively, and I can assure you, Marcus, you will lose." Marcus set the divorce papers aside and opened his desk drawer. From it, he pulled out a manila folder thinner than the one in his basement, but containing enough. He placed it on the desk between them. "Before we continue," Marcus said quietly, "you should look at this." Hartley frowned but took the folder. As he flipped through the contents, his expression shifted from confusion to concern to barely concealed panic. Inside were copies of Rachel's signed confession, not to the affair, but to something far worse. Financial documents showing she'd been embezzling from their joint business accounts for years, funneling money to David's failing investment firm. Bank statements, wire transfers, and most damning of all, emails between Rachel and David discussing how to frame Marcus for the very crimes she'd committed. "This is..." Hartley's voice trailed off. "Authentic," Marcus finished. "Every document verified by forensic accountants. She signed these papers 2 years ago when I restructured our business holdings. She never read what she was signing, just trusted me to handle the details. Turns out she confessed to embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "So here's what's going to happen. Rachel withdraws the divorce petition immediately. She signs full custody of Ethan and Sophia over to me. She walks away with the clothes on her back and nothing more. Or I file criminal charges this afternoon." Hartley's face had gone pale. I need to consult with my client." "You have 24 hours, Marcus said, standing. "Oh, and Jonathan, tell Rachel her mother might want to start preparing her own defense. The Nguyen family, the one killed by her nephew 13 years ago. They have surviving relatives who'd be very interested in what really happened that night." As Hartley stumbled out of the office, Marcus sat back down and finally looked at the divorce papers. He'd been served at work, just as the title promised, but he'd been ready with her signed confession just as he'd planned. The first call came just after midnight. Marcus sat in his study, the house quiet, except for the hum of his laptop. Rachel's name flashed across his phone screen. He let it ring until it stopped. A minute later it rang again. This time David Chen, her co-conspirator and the self-appointed architect of Marcus's downfall. Marcus ignored that one too, leaning back in his chair with the same calm he had carried into his office earlier that day. The third call came less than 5 minutes later. Elizabeth Whitmore. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice sharp, but carrying a thread of unease. Elizabeth was used to intimidation, but now it trembled at the edges. Marcus spoke evenly, his tone clipped and deliberate. "Justice." There was silence on the line. Elizabeth inhaled slowly, then exhaled as if weighing every word. "You think you can threaten me with half-baked accusations?" "They're not accusations," Marcus replied. "They're records. Sealed court documents, financial transfers, photographs. You've spent years keeping the Nguyen family buried under lies, but the truth is still out there. You know it, and now so do I." Elizabeth's voice softened, almost pleading. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want 3 things," he said without hesitation. "Rachel withdraws the divorce petition immediately and signs full custody of Ethan and Sophia over to me. David sells his share of our joint ventures back to me at the original valuation, not the inflated number he tried to extort. And you resign from the bench quietly before the federal investigators get to you first. Fail to do any of this, and the Nguyen family finally gets justice. I'll make sure every journalist in this city has what they need to blow this open." Elizabeth didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight. "You're bluffing." Marcus's answer was calm and final. "You already know I'm not." He hung up before she could respond, leaving her in silence. By morning, the cracks in the Whitmore family's armor were already beginning to show. Marcus had sent no direct threats to the media, but he had made sure that an anonymous tip complete with vague but enticing details about the Nguyen case landed in the inboxes of 3 investigative journalists. He also sent a carefully redacted version of the financial records to a contact at the federal prosecutor's office. It wasn't enough to confirm the entire scandal, but it was enough to raise questions the Whitmores couldn't afford. David was the first to panic. By late afternoon, he left a furious voicemail, his voice cracking as he shouted that Marcus was destroying everything. He called again an hour later, this time begging for a meeting. Marcus didn't answer. Rachel's resolve broke next. She showed up at Marcus's office, unannounced, her designer suit wrinkled, her usual composure slipping. "You're ruining us," she said, trying to sound angry, but her tone betrayed fear. "Do you even care what this will do to Ethan and Sophia?" Marcus stared at her for a long moment before answering. "I care about them more than anyone in your family ever has. That's why I'm doing this." By evening, the story had begun to grow legs. News outlets hinted at a long-buried judicial cover-up involving a respected judge. Online forums speculated about corruption in the Whitmore family. And for the first time in her career, Elizabeth skipped her scheduled court session. She knew Marcus wasn't bluffing, and she knew the clock was running out. The tension in Hartley's conference room was suffocating. Marcus sat at the far end of the table, his posture relaxed, while Rachel sat stiffly across from him, her hands trembling as she gripped a pen. The thick stack of documents in front of her represented everything she had fought for: control, custody, wealth, and she was about to sign it all away. Hartley, usually smug and confident, looked pale and distracted, his gaze fixed on the tabletop as if he wanted to be anywhere but there. "Are we doing this or not?" Marcus asked calmly, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Rachel glared at him, but the fight in her eyes was gone. Her mother had gone silent after Marcus's ultimatum. David had refused to even show up, and federal investigators had begun making quiet inquiries into the Whitmore family's finances. Every advantage she thought she had was gone. She lowered her eyes and scribbled her name at the bottom of the custody agreement, then the business transfer, and finally the property settlement. Each signature felt like another brick pulled from the empire she had tried to build. When she finished, she pushed the documents across the table. "You win," she said bitterly. Marcus didn't move to take them right away. Instead, he leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "No, Rachel. This isn't about winning. This is about truth. So before we finish, you're going to say it, why you did all of this." She stared at him, her lips pressed tightly together. Hartley shifted uncomfortably, sensing where this was headed. Marcus stayed silent, waiting. Finally, Rachel slammed the pen onto the table and snapped. "You want the truth? Fine. You were never good enough for me," she spat. "I married you because you were useful. Because you had skills, connections, and a growing business. But you were just a tech guy pretending to be something bigger. I outgrew you years ago." Marcus listened without flinching. When she was finished, he gave a slow nod. "And yet I just took everything you valued." Rachel's face flushed red, but she said nothing. Her breathing was shallow, almost shaky. Marcus finally gathered the signed documents and slipped them into his leather portfolio. But before standing, he pulled out another envelope and set it in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary. "Consider it a gift," Marcus said. She opened the envelope and froze. Inside were photographs David Chen boarding a private jet with a woman half his age, their hands intertwined. Another shot showed David withdrawing large sums of cash from a Cayman Islands account registered in both his and Rachel's names. The final photo captured him lounging on a yacht, champagne in hand, already celebrating his escape. Rachel's hand trembled as she flipped through the images. This isn't real," she whispered, though her voice cracked with the weight of realization. "It's real," Marcus said evenly. "David drained the accounts 2 days ago. By now he's probably in the Caribbean. Whatever he promised you, it's gone. Just like everything else." Rachel's composure finally shattered. She buried her face in her hands' shoulders, shaking, a muffled sob escaping her lips. For a moment the room was silent except for her quiet breakdown. Hartley looked away uncomfortable, but Marcus didn't move. He simply stood, slid the portfolio under his arm, and turned toward the door. Without looking back, he said one last thing. "You wanted power, Rachel. Now you have nothing left to fight for." He left her there, the signed agreements on the table and the weight of her own choices crushing her far more effectively than anything he could have said. The public reckoning came faster than even Marcus expected. Within a week of Rachel signing the final agreements, Elizabeth Whitmore announced her resignation from the bench. The statement she released to the press cited personal health reasons, but everyone knew the truth. The leaked court records were now part of a growing federal inquiry, and whispers about the Nguyen family case had begun dominating local news cycles. What had once been a tightly controlled narrative of integrity and service was unraveling in real time. Richard Whitmore's development empire, long considered untouchable, became the next casualty. Federal investigators, armed with Marcus's evidence, quietly froze several of his key accounts under suspicion of money laundering and campaign finance violations. Investors began pulling out and property values dropped overnight. The Nguyen family, now empowered by a team of civil attorneys, filed lawsuits that tied up nearly every major Whitmore asset. Decades of cultivated influence and wealth were collapsing under the weight of the truth. And Marcus hadn't spoken a single word to the media. He didn't need to. The truth, once freed, did its own damage. Rachel's downfall was quieter, but no less final. The divorce settlement and custody agreement had left her financially cornered, and David's theft of their shared accounts ensured she had no safety net. Within months, she was forced to sell her luxury cars and the few personal investments she still controlled just to stay afloat. The high society invitations that once defined her life vanished. People who had once fawned over her stopped returning her calls. Eventually, she took a position as a mid-level real estate agent in a smaller suburban firm. There were no charity galas, no luxury penthouses to boast about, just open houses and commission-based paychecks. Occasionally, Marcus would hear about her through mutual acquaintances. She was polite, they said, even humbled, though her pride still showed in the way she carried herself. But for the first time in years, Rachel no longer had any real power to wield. She existed on the edges now, far from the life she had once sacrificed everything to control. David Chen, however, was not allowed to fade into quiet obscurity. Marcus had made sure of that. Through contacts he still had from his military intelligence days, Marcus provided investigators with detailed information about David's offshore accounts and the fraudulent business transactions he had orchestrated. Within weeks, David's assets were frozen, and his name appeared on financial crime watch lists. He fled overseas, but every move narrowed his options further. The woman he had fled with left him the moment his money became inaccessible. By the time the news outlets caught wind of his downfall, David was described as a fugitive living in temporary rentals under assumed names, his reputation in both business and social circles destroyed. Marcus didn't celebrate any of it. Sitting in his home office late at night, he would sometimes think about how easily he could have let his anger dictate every step, how tempting it had been to crush them purely out of revenge. But this was never about spite. It had always been about balance, ensuring that those who had destroyed others for their own gain finally faced consequences. The Whitmores had built their power on lies, and now those lies had consumed them. For Marcus, justice wasn't loud. It was quiet, methodical, and final. And for the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. 3 months later, the world felt different for Marcus Sterling. On a warm Saturday afternoon in their new home in Arlington, he stood on the back deck leaning against the wooden railing as he watched Ethan and Sophia chase each other across the yard. Their laughter filled the air bright and unburdened a sound he hadn't heard so freely in months. They didn't understand the full scope of what had happened, the legal battles, the threats, or the quiet war he had waged to protect them. All they knew was that their father had fought for them. And that was enough. Ethan stopped to catch his breath. His cheeks flushed from running, while Sophia squealed and darted toward the swing set Marcus had installed the week before. He smiled to himself, a quiet pride settling in his chest. This was why he had endured every sleepless night, why he had chosen strategy over rage. He hadn't fought for revenge. He had fought for this, a simple, peaceful moment. Life had shifted in other ways, too. Sterling Security Solutions, the firm he had built before the Whitmores tried to strip it from him, was thriving again. News of the Whitmore scandal had spread through the corporate world, and clients who once hesitated to sign with him now lined up for contracts. His reputation, already solid, was stronger than ever. Marcus had expanded his operations, hiring a new team of trusted former colleagues, and he'd found himself turning down more work than he accepted, but he didn't bury himself in it the way he once had. Late nights staring at security feeds had been replaced with family dinners, school science fairs, and evenings teaching Ethan about coding while helping Sophia with her art projects. Marcus had also learned to let go of anger. He could have pursued the Whitmores further, could have ensured every last piece of their influence was destroyed, but he had already accomplished what mattered most. Elizabeth was disgraced. Richard's empire was under federal scrutiny. David was a fugitive. And Rachel was no longer a threat. She was just another person trying to rebuild from the ruins of her own choices. Inside his home office, a single photograph remained on the shelf. It was of Rachel, taken years ago, back when they were still a family. Marcus kept it not out of lingering love or nostalgia, but as a reminder. Trust, he had learned, was not something to give away freely. It was something to be earned carefully and never taken for granted. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the Massachusetts landscape in shades of gold and amber, Marcus stepped off the deck and joined his children in the yard. Ethan tossed him a football, and Sophia cheered when he caught it easily. "Dad, can we get pizza tonight?" Sophia asked, her eyes bright with hope. "And ice cream," Ethan added quickly. Marcus laughed, a genuine sound that came easier these days. "Pizza and ice cream it is." For the first time in years, Marcus felt like the ground beneath him was solid. His life wasn't perfect, but it was his earned through patient sacrifice and a quiet determination to protect what truly mattered. Some betrayals try to take everything from you, but sometimes they leave you with exactly what you need: the truth about who you are, the strength to stand alone, and the wisdom to build something better from the ashes. As he watched his children play in the fading light, Marcus understood that victory wasn't about destroying those who wronged you. It was about refusing to let them destroy you. And in that refusal, finding a peace that no amount of revenge could ever provide. Have you ever had to choose between revenge and rebuilding? Sometimes the greatest victory is simply walking away with your integrity intact. I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.